August 1st, 1759. The sun rises over the fields near Minden, Germany. 6 British regiments, standing shoulder to shoulder in formation, are about to do the impossible, face down a devastating charge from Europe's finest cavalry, and emerge victorious. France dominated the battlefield of Europe. Just 2 years earlier, their mighty armies had invaded Hanover and nearly forced a humiliating peace on Great Britain and her allies. French military superiority seemed unquestionable, their tactics and discipline the envy of Europe. Their cavalry, considered the continent's most formidable mounted force, struck fear into the hearts of opposing infantry. But at Minden, everything would change forever. Picture this: 3,000 British soldiers standing in thin red lines on an open field, facing down 10,000 charging French horsemen, the elite of France's military machine. Conventional military wisdom said it couldn't be done. Infantry in line formation should break and scatter before cavalry's thundering charge. Yet on this summer day, through a French tactical blunder and courage beyond imagination, this battle would become one of military history's most glorious and tragically forgotten moments. The ground trembled beneath the weight of thousands of hooves. The French cavalry, resplendent in their ornate uniforms, charged forward with absolute confidence. The British soldiers stood firm, muskets ready, their officers commanding them to hold fire until they could see the whites of their eyes. When the order finally came to fire, the world changed. If you love military history and want to discover how 3,000 British infantry defeated 10,000 French cavalrymen, stay right there. Like this video, subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles and prepare yourself for a story so extraordinary it sounds like fiction. But I assure you, it's absolutely real. This is the Battle of Minden, where discipline, courage, and tactical genius rewrote the rules of European warfare. In 1759, the 7 Years' War had reached its critical peak. This wasn't just any conflict. Historians often call it the First True World War, raging across 5 continents with the great powers of Europe maneuvering like grand masters on a deadly chessboard. France, under the ambitious Marshal de Contades, seemed unstoppable. With Europe's largest army and most feared cavalry, they sought to crush the Anglo-German alliance once and for all. The French strategy was clear: dominate Hanover, force Britain to sue for peace, and leave Frederick the Great's Prussia isolated and vulnerable. But standing against this French juggernaut was a military genius whose name deserves far more recognition: Ferdinand of Brunswick. This Prussian field marshal, handpicked by Frederick the Great himself, understood something crucial about warfare that Contades had forgotten. Battles aren't won by numbers alone, but by the clever positioning of forces and exploitation of terrain. Ferdinand was playing a dangerous game of deception. While appearing weak and overextended, he was meticulously setting a trap. He deliberately positioned his forces to make them seem scattered and vulnerable, practically inviting Contades to attack. The Prussian commander knew something the French general didn't: that the French consistently underestimated the discipline and resolve of the Allied troops, and this would prove their fatal mistake. While Contades saw only an opportunity to crush a weakened enemy, Ferdinand was orchestrating every movement with precision. He understood the psychological element of warfare. Sometimes appearing weak is the greatest strength. The French took the bait completely, abandoning their advantageous defensive positions along the Weser River to pursue what they believed was an easy victory. Here's something fascinating that few people know. After the battle, British officers were absolutely furious. When the French army began retreating in disarray, the Allied cavalry under Lord George Sackville refused to advance and pursue the fleeing enemy. Despite receiving 3 direct orders to charge, Sackville hesitated, claiming confusion about the commands. Many military historians believe that had the cavalry pursued the retreating French, they could have utterly destroyed Contades' army, potentially ending the continental phase of the war right then and there. Sackville was later court-martialed for his inaction, declared unfit for military service, and his name became synonymous with cowardice in British military circles. This controversial decision remains one of history's great what-if moments, a single commander's hesitation potentially extending a global conflict by years. The European chess game that led to Minden wasn't just about armies clashing on fields. It was a complex dance of deception, psychology, and strategic brilliance. And Ferdinand of Brunswick, though often overshadowed by Frederick the Great in historical accounts, proved himself one of the era's most brilliant military minds. Every decisive battle in history has its turning point, that critical moment or decision that alters the course of events forever. For the Battle of Minden, this pivotal mistake came from the French commander, Marshal de Contades, a man whose military record had been nearly flawless until that fateful summer day. Contades had everything going his way. His forces had recently captured the fortress of Minden on July 10th, a significant strategic victory that gave France control of a crucial crossing point on the Weser River. His army occupied naturally defensive terrain, high ground overlooking the river with woods protecting their flanks. From this position, the French could have forced Ferdinand's allied army to attack at a disadvantage, climbing uphill into prepared positions. But overconfidence is a dangerous thing in warfare. Intelligence reports had convinced Contades that the Allied forces were scattered and vulnerable. He saw what appeared to be disorganization in their movements and mistook Ferdinand's carefully orchestrated trap for genuine weakness. In what would become one of the most consequential military misjudgments of the 18th century, Contades made the fatal decision to abandon his superior defensive position. The French commander moved his troops down from the safety of the heights and onto the open plains near Minden. This flat, expansive battlefield, known as the Minden Heath, would soon become the stage for an extraordinary military upset. What Contades didn't realize was that he was playing directly into Ferdinand's hands. The Prussian commander had deliberately maneuvered his forces to create the impression of confusion and vulnerability, all while positioning his infantry regiments exactly where they needed to be for the coming confrontation. Most critically, Contades positioned his cavalry, the pride of the French army, at the center of his battle line, with infantry on the flanks. This was a radical departure from conventional 18th century tactics, where cavalry typically occupied the wings while infantry held the center. Why would such an experienced commander make such an unusual deployment? He likely believed his elite horsemen could easily punch through what he perceived as Ferdinand's weak center, splitting the Allied army in two. What makes this error even more remarkable is that Contades had personally reconnoitered the battlefield the day before. Standing on a small rise overlooking the plain, he had surveyed the terrain where his troops would fight. Yet somehow he failed to recognize how perfectly suited this open ground was for disciplined infantry armed with muskets, especially when those infantry were formed in line, capable of delivering devastating volley fire. A fascinating detail often overlooked. Just hours before the battle, local farmers had harvested much of the tall grass in the area. This seemingly insignificant agricultural activity actually improved visibility across the battlefield, allowing the British and Hanoverian infantry to spot the French cavalry charges earlier and prepare their volleys with deadly precision. By abandoning the high ground and exposing his forces on open terrain, Contades transformed what could have been a French victory into the perfect scenario for disaster. His cavalry, the most feared in Europe, would soon discover that even the mightiest horsemen were vulnerable against disciplined infantry who refused to break. And now we arrive at the decisive moment of the Battle of Minden, a moment that would rewrite military doctrine and astonish every officer in Europe. Dawn broke on August 1st, 1759. A morning mist hung over the field as the opposing armies prepared for battle. 6 British regiments and 2 Hanoverian battalions, roughly 3,000 men in total, had advanced toward the French center, forming their famous thin red line. Standing just 4 men deep, they created a formation nearly half a mile long, their bayonets glinting in the morning sun. Across the field, 10,000 French cavalrymen, the cream of French aristocracy mounted on the finest war horses in Europe, prepared to charge. These weren't ordinary horsemen. These were the Carabiniers and the Maison du Roi, the household cavalry, France's elite heavy cavalry, whose thundering charges had broken countless enemy formations throughout history. According to military wisdom that stretched back to ancient times, this was about to become a massacre. Cavalry crushing infantry in open terrain was one of warfare's absolutes, especially when the infantry were in line formation rather than defensive squares. Every military manual, every tactician, every general in Europe would have predicted the same outcome. The British lines would waver, break, and be cut to pieces. The British commanders knew exactly what they were facing. Their orders were clear and simple. No man is to fire till he sees the whites of their eyes. This wasn't mere dramatic flair, it was deadly calculation. Muskets of this era were notoriously inaccurate beyond 50 yards. Every yard closer the enemy came before you fired meant dozens more would fall when you did. As the French cavalry advanced, the ground literally trembled beneath thousands of hooves. Imagine the discipline required to stand perfectly still as 10,000 horsemen charged directly at you, their sabers drawn and glinting in the sun. The thundering hooves grew louder, dust clouds rising, the very air vibrating with the approaching doom. Still, the British held their fire. Closer, closer still. Then at a range so close that some accounts suggest you could see the expressions on the French riders' faces, the order came, "Fire!" 3,000 muskets discharged simultaneously. The sound was like a thunderclap, the smoke obscuring the field in an instant. When it cleared, the unbelievable had happened. The front ranks of French cavalry were decimated, horses and riders tumbling to the ground, creating chaos as those behind collided with the fallen. But one volley wasn't enough to stop such a massive force. The British and Hanoverians reloaded with remarkable speed. A well-trained soldier could reload and fire 3 times in a minute, an extraordinary feat with the muzzle-loading weapons of the day. Volley after disciplined volley poured into the French ranks. A remarkable detail often overlooked. Many British regiments at Minden were wearing red roses in their hats as the battle fell on the first day of August, traditionally associated with Yorkshire Day. These Minden roses became symbols of the incredible victory, and to this day, certain British regiments commemorate the battle by wearing roses on its anniversary. Despite suffering devastating casualties, the French cavalry reformed and charged again and again, 6 times in total. Each time, they were met with the same disciplined volleys from the unwavering Allied line. Finally, the unthinkable happened. The mighty French cavalry withdrew in disarray, defeated by infantry on open ground. This wasn't merely unusual, it revolutionized military thinking. For the first time in modern warfare, infantry in line formation had defeated heavy cavalry on open terrain. It was as if someone had suddenly announced that water could flow uphill. Following the cavalry's retreat, the Allied line advanced steadily across the battlefield, pushing the demoralized French forces before them. The battle that military theory said couldn't be won had just been won decisively. So, what do you think? Did you know that the Battle of Minden nearly ended the 7 war years ahead of schedule? The disciplined stand of a few thousand infantrymen changed the course of European history. What would you have done in Contades' position? Would you have abandoned the high ground, used a different tactical formation? Let me know in the comments below. What would you have done if you were Contades? And don't forget, hit that like button, share this video with your history-loving friends, and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles for more incredible stories that your history teachers never told you. Hit the notification bell too, so you don't miss our upcoming episode on the stunning naval battles of the same year that secured Britain's dominance of the world's oceans. The triumph at Minden wasn't just another victory in a long war. It became a cornerstone of what the British would come to call their annus mirabilis, the miracle year of 1759. In this extraordinary year, British forces achieved a series of seemingly impossible victories that would transform not just the 7 Years' War, but the fate of nations and empires for centuries to come. While Minden secured Britain's position in Europe across the Atlantic, General James Wolfe was scaling the cliffs of Quebec to defeat the French on the Plains of Abraham. In the Caribbean, British forces seized Guadeloupe, and at sea, Admiral Hawke's daring victory at Quiberon Bay destroyed French naval power. Together, these victories laid the foundation for what would become the British Empire's century of global dominance. But Minden itself left an indelible mark on military history and culture that endures to this day. After the battle, France never again posed a serious threat to Hanover for the remainder of the war. Their ambitions to dominate Central Europe were permanently checked. The psychological impact was profound. French military prestige, particularly the aura of invincibility surrounding their cavalry, was shattered. For the British Army, Minden became a symbol of pride and excellence that continues to this day. The 6 British regiments that stood firm against the French cavalry earned the right to wear Minden roses on their uniforms on August 1st each year. These became known as the Minden regiments, and they include some of the most storied units in British military history: the Suffolk Regiment, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, the King's Own Scottish Borderers, the Lancashire Fusiliers, the Royal Hampshire Regiment, and the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. A fascinating tradition emerged after the battle. According to accounts, the British soldiers picked roses from gardens near the battlefield to place in their hats as they marched back from victory. This gesture of triumph has been commemorated for over 2.5 centuries. Even now, on Minden Day, their successor regiments proudly display roses in a tradition that directly connects today's soldiers with those brave men who refused to break before the French cavalry in 1759. The battle also revolutionized military tactics. Before Minden, the idea that infantry in line formation could withstand cavalry on open ground was considered absurd. After Minden, military theorists throughout Europe had to reconsider fundamental assumptions about battlefield dynamics. The disciplined volley fire demonstrated at Minden would become a cornerstone of infantry tactics for the next century. Perhaps most importantly, Minden demonstrated a timeless military truth. Disciplined soldiers who believe in their training and their leaders can accomplish what seems impossible. Those British and Hanoverian infantrymen didn't have technological advantages or numerical superiority. What they had was unshakable discipline, perfect training, and absolute confidence in their abilities. King George II was so impressed by the victory that he issued a royal warrant giving the British regiments at Minden the unique privilege of marching past the monarch with bayonets fixed, an honor usually reserved for Guards regiments. The political consequences were equally significant. The victory strengthened the Anglo-Prussian alliance and boosted morale across their territories. In Britain, news of Minden cemented public support for the war effort and vindicated Prime Minister William Pitt's controversial strategy of fighting France in Europe rather than focusing exclusively on colonial conquests. Minden proved that with courage, discipline, and brilliant leadership, the impossible becomes possible. 6 regiments of infantry stood against the might of French cavalry and rewrote history. Their legacy reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories come not from overwhelming force, but from unwavering resolve. As the dust settled on the fields of Minden that August day in 1759, more than just a battle had been decided. A powerful lesson in military history had been written in blood and courage, one that resonates even today, nearly 3 centuries later. Minden was never just about the clash of armies. It was a profound demonstration that arrogance can defeat even the most powerful forces, while discipline and courage can accomplish what seems utterly impossible. The French, convinced of their superiority and contemptuous of their enemies' capabilities, marched confidently into disaster. The British and their allies, standing firm against overwhelming odds, transformed military doctrine through sheer resolve. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this battle is how it embodies timeless principles of leadership and human nature. Contades' overconfidence led to catastrophic decisions. Ferdinand's strategic patience and psychological insight created the perfect trap. And those British infantrymen standing in their thin red line as the thunder of 10,000 hooves approached demonstrated the extraordinary power of discipline under pressure. In many ways, the Battle of Minden remains a perfect metaphor for triumph against overwhelming odds. It reminds us that victory doesn't always go to the strongest or most numerous, but often to those who maintain their discipline and believe in their training when facing seemingly impossible challenges. One final fascinating detail. After the battle, many French officers refused to believe what had happened. They insisted there must have been hidden obstacles that stopped their cavalry, or that the British must have secretly formed squares rather than lines. They simply couldn't accept that infantry in line formation had defeated cavalry on open ground. It contradicted everything they believed about warfare. Sometimes, the most revolutionary achievements are those that others insist must be impossible. So what do you think was more impressive? Ferdinand of Brunswick's brilliant strategic deception that lured the French into the perfect trap, or the iron discipline of those British and Hanoverian soldiers who stood firm as the elite of French cavalry charged directly at them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this epic tale of military genius and extraordinary courage, please hit that like button now. Share this video with friends who love history as much as you do. And most importantly, subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles for more incredible stories from history that school textbooks never taught you. Hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss our upcoming episode on the Battle of Quiberon Bay, where the British Royal Navy sailed directly into a storm-ravaged bay to destroy the French fleet in what might be the most daring naval action of the entire century. This is Modern Age Chronicles, bringing history's forgotten moments back to life. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary victories come from those moments when brave men and women refuse to accept what everyone else insists is impossible.